Welcome back to another reading and correcting with me, Kindar, the Tiger Writes, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. These are where I read a chapter from one of my stories and correct it as I go. If you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch and YouTube. And if you want to support me, that is on my Patreon. Today we are doing chapter 95 of Breaking Step. Tibs returned to the hall and unlocked the next door to look at yet another small office. This one with only a woman-galling clerk seated behind the desk and no apparent cash. It didn't even have a safe, he noticed, once he'd made his way around the desk. He almost continued around her to the side of the pouch, but realized this would break the pattern of how he'd done things since realizing the sheath was enchanted. It and the quaint pouch were attached to the belt, so he'd gone for that instead. He made a knife. All metal essence and readied himself. Golems were quick to react, but once he had hold of the belt, he could hang on as it was hit and slice it. And slice it off. A glance over the desk showed Maz flaming arrow ready. He quickly took hold of the belt, only for it to be yanked out of his fingers as the golem jumped to its feet. Then it staggered back as heat bloomed. Tibs jumped as it fell against the wall and sliced the belt off as a second arrow destroyed its torso. Then he rolled away and was sprawled in a corner, watching it crumble. Sword in hand. Tibs, Jekyll called, and he raised his hand to show the belt. That's good. Are you okay? He stood. The sword was in its hand. It's gone now. Isn't it the sheath that's enchanted? Miss asked. The sword had a weave on it, too, Tibs said. The pouch contained a blank silver coin and a ring. I don't know, Dawn said, making the two one item should mean it's less costly to make, from what I've read, but that's only about sorcerer's work. Stowe was right. The difference between this and gold was minor, and he'd held gold coins. The only gold Stowe had made was part of decorating items. The weave was too dense. For Tibs to think it was a useless enchantment, even without a sense of what Ganny was aiming for. But if it was possible to add uselessness to a weave, then he certainly would be fooled by this. That's new, Jekyll said at his side. Tibs grinned. It's gold. Jekyll took it and turned it over. Are you sure? Of course. Why wasn't he impressed? And there's a weave on it. Duran's going to give us a lot of coins for it. His friend studied the ring closer. What does the weave do? Because I don't think it's... Trust me, Tibs said, fighting to sound casual and staring at the fighter. I know what Darren is looking for. That's going to help make sure the guild doesn't own us once we reach Epsilon. Jekyll searched his face. Just how well did them know people? They traveled and had been in the town, but they were dismissive. Could they read Jekyll's uncertainty? He'd never asked Stowe how he saw them. Was it the same way Tibs saw the world, or was it more like how he sensed things? Forms without details that let him know how someone felt? The fighter shrugged and handed it back. Okay, you're the one who knows that stuff. So long as it's good loot, I'm happy. What happened? As asked. I saw the belt on its hip as I loosed the arrow. I think the golems are more alert in this part. Or it was just this one. I wasn't ready for how fast it reacted. He looked at Dunn. Do people in offices get more important as you go further in? I don't know. Terania has her office in the back, but Most of the others seem to be for regular clerks, but that's the guild, and this isn't a real city office. There's no telling how the dungeon set it up. The next office was unoccupied. Books were lined up in the bookshelf. I'll check them for traps, Tib said before Dawn commented. There had been 3 real books among all the previous bookshelves, each trap with a vial containing a lot of fire and air essence set to break if not disarmed. Fire loved paper, Tibbs knew. The books weren't trapped, and when Tibbs tried to open one, he couldn't. Props again. The second drawer contained the pouch, but it only had 2 rings. The other had papers and more of those quill-like cylinders. Jackal overplayed being excited at the ring, but the them didn't comment, so maybe they couldn't tell. The next office had 2 golden people, only the one behind the desk, the clerk, was armed and had a pouch, but they both reacted when Tibbs grabbed the belt, holding on when the clerk jumped to its feet and he had it cut before it reached for the sword. It crumbled, covered with fire, while the other one was partially melted with corruption by the time it crumbled away. This pouch had 4 rings, and Jackal's grin was so broad and stiff, Tibbs figured the mouth had to hurt. The next office had no clerk, and the pouch only had 2 blank silver coins. Tibbs acted disappointed and hoped Jackal was paying attention. This won't work once they reach the next floor, the them said, as Tibbs unlocked the next office. You can't know which direction they'll take. The office had 1 clerk. It doesn't matter what direction they go in, Stowe replied. The pouches are caches, so I can adjust it so it will follow Ganny's pattern. Which means, Ganny continued, that since they check one room, then the one facing it, even if they go left, which is the shortest way to the boss room, they won't reach it before the door closes. The door closes. And well before that, the fighter is going to push them for more offices so he can get more of the rings. They'd go right, Tibbs decided, grabbing the belt and cutting it. Let them think they couldn't win. He raised his hand to show the belt to the others as the golem crumbled away under the fire. Then it was just a question of deciding how long it should take before Tibbs had worked out the pattern. And then things would go quickly. 8 rings! Jackal exclaimed. We're going to be rich! He so had to teach his friend how to act. The 8th office had 2 clerks and a pouch heavy with 1 in 6 rings. Jackal only grinned, seeming unsure how he was expected to act. As he expected, the next room's pouch only contained coins, 3 of them. Wait, Dawn said as Tibbs stepped to the next door. He looked along the hall. I want to test something. Tibbs stopped the sorcerer. What do you want to test? I'll explain afterward. I need you to make sure the floor's safe until we reach the door I need. By now, Tibbs was confident the hall was devoid of traps, other than the gong, but he still checked. Again, he depended on them making assumptions to get them. It's this one, Dawn said. 1 door short of the one Tibbs knew contained the rings. Tibbs wondered if he should correct him. This was too soon for him to have worked it. Was this too soon for him to have worked it out? If Dawn had it wrong, then Tibbs couldn't have it right yet. He unlocked the door to the small office, which had 3 golem people in it. Just get the pouch, Dawn said. The sheath'll bring us good coin. Jackal objected. You have enough of those. The sorcerer countered dismissively, and Tibbs said those rings are worth enough to buy our freedom, so they have to be the priority. It seems the fighter's not the most greedy of them, the dem said with mirth. Jackal looked at Tibbs, and he wasn't sure how to instruct him to react. Dawn was going to be annoyed at being wrong, and it would be Tibbs who had made it that obvious. The sorcerer hadn't blown up at something like that since joining the team, but no, he was missing something. Dawn didn't need the coins. He'd already had an agreement for his freedom from the guild. We can go back to the offices we pass if we have to, he said before making his way to the back. He added a filigree of dew to the point of the knife, and he hardly had to touch the pouch to open it and catch the 2 coins that fell out. That's all that was in it, he showed Don once he was back. Don nodded with what looked like satisfaction, stepped past the one room, the one containing the rings, and pointed to the door. Yeah, he had the wrong pattern. Don, Jekyll said cautiously, there weren't any rings here. It might be best to go back and do those we passed by. Checking all of them is going to keep us here well past the door closing, and there's no telling if the pattern is going to be changed for our next run. And glancing at him, Tibs could only shrug. His biggest concern was Don's disappointment. What if it doesn't have any ring? Jekyll asked, his tone even more cautious. I need you to trust me, Don replied with a surprisingly understanding tone. Just because you aren't seeing the result you want to see, it doesn't mean the experiment isn't giving me results I can use. Jekyll looked at the others. Don't look at me, Maz said. I'm only smarter than you in this group. As usual, Commodore remained silent. Don's smarter than me, Tibs said, stepping to the door. He'd explain it, and how it was he knew the pattern once they were outside, and if he could make sure the them wasn't watching. Hopefully, Don would be bearable until then. The office only had the golem clerk behind the desk and a cabinet behind it. Get the sheath, too, Jekyll said. That isn't needed, Don replied. Don, I want something out of this in case you're wrong again. Then the cabinet's better, Tibs said, surprised Don didn't protest. It has potions we can use in the boss fight, and it means we don't need to fight the clerk. Which you don't take part in, Mez said, as Jekyll opened his mouth to protest. Fine, the cabinet, then the pouch. Even looking at the pouch, Tib could tell it had no coins. He still cut it open, catching the key that fell out, and used it to unlock the cabinet. He took the 3 potions and exited. Instead of being annoyed or even disappointed at the news there were no rings, Don stepped back 1 door and motioned to it. Why didn't you pick that one first, then? Jekyll asked, with enough annoyance to make up for what the sorcerer wasn't showing. I wanted to make sure I was right. You weren't. There weren't any rings in that one or that one. We might as well go back in case one of them will have them. Trust me, the sorcerer said. Jekyll threw his hands up. Why am I even surprised? It's not like you've ever given a fuck what I think. Tibs studied Don, who looked back at him. He was hiding his concern well. He was worried Tibs would side with Jekyll, as he usually did. But Tibs knew he was right about the office. He just didn't understand why the subterfuge. This room was empty, and the pouch was in the second drawer, definitely filled. He undid the trap and retrieved it. He lobbed it at a triumphant Don. Why did you waste time with the other 2? Jekyll demanded in exasperation. Because, without testing it, all I'd known was that there were rings in this office, and that could have been at random, which would mean there might have been others before, and I wouldn't actually know where the office with them, and I wouldn't actually have known where the office with them was. Now, if that one has rings, I know where they all are. You said they wouldn't be able to figure it out, the them said angrily. I didn't think he'd work it out, Genny replied, mystified. Tibs was happy and proud that Don had worked it out ahead of him figuring he could justify having the answer. He was happier when Don led them to the 2 and first room, which had a pouch nearly bursting with rings. And this concludes chapter 95 of Breaking Step. If you are enjoying this, please leave a like. If you want to know when the next chapter is going to be up, subscribe and hit the bell. If you want to read the story as well as the other books in the series, they are up on Royal Road. If you want to read ahead of what is posted there, that is on my Patreon, where we are about 20 chapters ahead. If you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch and YouTube. And with that, I shall wish you a good day.